Welcome to Curito Connects. I'm your host, Jen, and I've been conversing with friends around the world about life challenges and impactful moments. Conversations on this platform look at answering the questions how we overcome challenges and how our experiences shape who we are and the work we do today. I hope this work can inspire you on your own personal and individual journey. Let's dive right in. Hello, my guest today is Olivia Cotes-James, the founder of LUÜNA Naturals, a company she founded in 2017 that is a purpose-driven period wellness company proudly built between Hong Kong and Shanghai by a 100% women-led team. Hi, Olivia.
Hello, thanks for having me.
I am really excited to be able to have Olivia on Curito Connects today. You are currently sitting in the UK while I'm in Taipei. And to have a conversation on menstrual cycles and women's health. On top of that, the fact that Olivia is bringing this topic to the forefront in the Chinese-speaking community. So I'm really excited to talk about that as well. And today we are here to have Olivia share with us how her own negative period experiences led her to host period workshops amongst her peers that later inspired her to create LUÜNA Naturals. So I won't say more so I can let Olivia share her journey, but I'd lead by asking Olivia, when was your first period experience and how were you taught to understand the changes your body was going through at the time?
Well, such a good question to kick off with, Jan. My first period experience, I really didn't realize, this might sound a bit strange, but I didn't realize that my first period experience played such a big role in the LUÜNA journey up until maybe even 6 months into launching the brand. I know it seems obvious that it would play a part, but I really felt that in my mid-20s, my LUÜNA journey was very much related to that experience in my mid-20s, whereby I started to understand how limited my education around menstruation was, how in the dark I felt about my body and its natural processes. But when I started to unpick, years prior to that, so my first period happened when I was around 12 years old, I think. I can't remember exactly, but we're talking 11, 12. And I started to unpick that early experience and realize that those early moments were so pivotal in what was later my LUÜNA journey. So at the age of 11 or 12, I remember having had some education around periods, but it was very limited. It was done completely separately to the boys at school. We were totally segregated from each other and taken into separate rooms and told about what was going to be happening with our bodies. And ultimately, it was very straightforward, biological, and didn't really, I think, address, the nuances of this experience and, basically equipped me with what I needed to know when the time was to come.
Right.
So I remember one day just being in the bathroom, pulling my pants down and seeing blood for the first time. And it's incredibly poignant to me when I look back that as soon as I saw that menstrual blood, I immediately felt that my life as I knew it was over. And that is a very sad thing for me to recognize. Now that I've done so much research into this, I realize how common that response to somebody's first period is. But it's really sad to me that as a young girl, I had lacked the education and support to be able for me to feel like this was anything other than a totally tragic and negative experience. I recognize that I'm really privileged in the sense that I ran out to my mum. She was kind and loving and took me under her arm and gave me some pads that she had been saving for me. But nonetheless, even with that reaction and that response in a very open family, it was still something that I felt was going to essentially ruin my life. And I think one thing to bear in mind is it actually did ruin my life to an extent for the first few years that I menstruated. So I had such heavy periods that I would actually bleed through a pad within an hour. I would
Oh,
have so many traumatic leaking experiences. I developed cystic acne that would flare up every time at the same time every single month.
right, right.
Um, so this menstruation actually came to me to be incredibly debilitating in many ways. I stopped playing sports. I really didn't socialize much when I was menstruating because I was so scared of leaking. I was fortunate not to really suffer too much pain during my period, but that
Uh-huh.
still didn't overcome how traumatic it still was, for all those reasons I just mentioned. So I really struggled with this experience for those early years of my life. And I guess in my mid 20s, when I had kind of overcome a lot of the really burdensome issues like the leaking through finding period products that I loved, but nonetheless, I still realized I didn't have a very positive relationship with menstruation. It was only then that I looked back and realized that those early years were playing such a pivotal role in shaping what is LUÜNA today.
Wow. I could just like sense like the emotion coming through. Just explaining that because I was thinking in my head like, huh, like when I mean, to what you were saying, like I don't really remember how old I was when I got my first period, but I also I don't. Do you have sisters? Do you have sisters or
No, I, I have a younger brother, so
okay?
yeah, he was too young to know
Yeah,
what was
yeah.
going on when I was running around flustered,
So I have an
having
older
started school.
sister. So I just
Mhm.
remember, I don't think, my own personal experience, I don't think it was that traumatic. I think it was more or less kind of like, okay, I know this is what's supposed to happen. Like, this is like our body goes through these changes. And then you kind of like, you just like deal with it, right? You just go, oh, okay. So every month this is going to happen. And then how you like deal with it. But I do agree with you that there is so much information that you, as adolescents, you're not taught, and you kind of just, everyone's experience is so different, so you kind of have to go seek out the information, or you learn from other women, right, or other girls, like various things, and all, like how often should you change it, like what material should you be using, and I remember early on, I mean, in Asia at the time, tampons weren't as common, right? So it's kind
Mm.
of like, there's that whole conversation too of like using tampons, no tampons. Um, so I wanted to ask too that, you said your mom kind of was preparing you for this experience when you had it. Did she share like her own experience with you?
I
It's a different
we didn't go
generation,
that
right?
Right, we didn't go that far, and ultimately, I was also very reserved in wanting to ask questions because I was
Mm,
embarrassed. This was not only something that I felt was going to be traumatic, and it was also something that I felt was incredibly shameful, even when talking to people like my mum. Now, that said, I had a very close relationship with my friends. We were able to talk about these things quite openly. But going back to something you said earlier about kind of seeking out information, it's I think my story really highlights two things to me. One, the incredible power of female relationships.
mhm.
The experiences that I had with my periods, traumatic leaking experiences, who were there for me without reserve. It was my girlfriends. And
Yeah.
that is something, that power of woman driven community is something that is really at the heart of LUÜNA today. On the other hand, it really highlights to me that when our communities are kind of starved, I suppose, of the right information and the right support, we kind of become an echo chamber that can sometimes work to normalize things that shouldn't be
Mhm.
normalized. For example, nobody, whilst everybody was there to support me with, a change of clothes or extra period products when I was leaking, nobody was there telling me that, periods shouldn't be this debilitating.
Yeah.
Ultimately, I was just seen, and so many women around me at that age were seen as, oh, she's just one of the unlucky ones. I look back and I think of
Mm,
a peer of mine who was, in agony on the changing room floors whenever her period came around, just in so much pain. And again, her friends, myself included, her family, our teachers, even medical professionals weren't able to say, this is not a normal level of pain, we should look into this. And
Mm.
when I look back
Mhm.
to my experience, I believe now, knowing what I know today, I believe I must have had a hormone imbalance. That
Mhm.
cystic acne, that very heavy bleeding. I know today that that is not something that I would dismiss as being normal and just accept. But I didn't have the support or the guidance to look into this in further detail. And for me, that really does highlight, again, one of the real core values of LUÜNA, which is to empower individuals with information about their body so they can get the help and support that they need.
Yeah, so powerful. I do want to ask too, in terms of that period when started menstruating, and then you said earlier too, like, to your early 20s, how did you navigate, those months, right? Like you like, oh, here I go again, and at what point, I guess, I wanted to ask, like, at what point did you have your first kind of aha of like, oh, wait, this is not normal, right? Was it you
Mm,
read about it somewhere? Did you happen to talk, like you said earlier, within support groups, like talk to someone who said, oh, you should get this checked out. This is not a normal flow, and for you to start kind of turning on that light bulb of like, oh, right,
mm,
okay, it's not me. Like, I mean, it is me, but
right.
it's like, it's not this, how I'm feeling is correct. Like, this should not be
Yeah.
happening.
No, I see what you mean. And I guess there's two parts to my answer. So the first part is around the age of 15 or 16, I believe, I actually was able to better manage my menstrual symptoms. So I had an experience whereby I think it must have been triggered by, just another leaking experience or something traumatic where I actually ended up just saying, this surely is not the status quo. I cannot be experiencing this for the next 30 odd years of my life. And I remember going into my mum's bathroom and stealing her tampons. And I remember I was really, really frightened. I was shaking with nerves. But I just was driven by this absolute demand for better for myself. And I tried tampons. It wasn't totally smooth sailing, but they ultimately were a product that then allowed me to better manage the heavy bleeding side of things and allowed me
Mm.
to play sport and socialize, which I, like I said, hadn't really been able to do. When it came to the cystic acne, unfortunately, that was something that I struggled with for a few years, but at least I had that kind of bleeding side under control. So that, I suppose, was my first experience of demanding better for myself and going out and seeking better options and seeing the positive effect that those options had on my life. However, that definitely was not combined with any kind of light bulb moment. I did not come up with the idea for LUÜNA at the age of 16. I then didn't think anything about my period again, really, for the next, into my early 20s, by which time I was living in Hong Kong. And as you can tell from that story, I actually became incredibly reliant on tampons. They were basically a product that allowed me to live my life during my period more closely to how I would live my life throughout the rest of the month. So, really, really important. And I suppose then, when I landed in Hong Kong and saw that access to tampons was quite limited, that
Yeah,
was a real challenge for me. This might be something you can relate to. This was 2013. It's very different now, but it was quite challenging to find tampons.
I think at the
In
time in Asia, it was, sorry, I was gonna say, I think at the time in Asia, it's
Yeah,
more like Japanese brands. Like
yeah,
that Japanese green and the blue packaging
yeah,
one, like the tampons,
right.
but like for my Caucasian friends who live in Asia, they're like, these are too small. Right? So it's like,
Oh, really? Okay,
so a
yeah.
lot of my friends, like would have to, yeah. Oh, and whenever when they back to the States or back to Europe,
Mhm.
they would always buy like a lot of them to bring it back, right? Because like you said, it's like it was a rare find. It's hard to find tampons, but the landscape has changed indeed.
It has changed for sure, but yes, like the friends that you mentioned, I was one of we called it back then tampon muling, and suitcases full of tampons, bringing them back to Hong Kong, distributing them amongst friends who needed them. Like this was very commonplace, but I really again thought nothing of it. I just totally accepted this as the norm until one day in 2015 long story short, got caught at the check-in desk with an overweight suitcase, not because of the tampons, I might add, but I, I basically was forced in front of a queue of people to unpack my suitcase, which was full of tampons. And I have to say, I remember so vividly how mortifying this was, being crouched at the check-in desk, having to reshuffle everything, and it was during that moment that I suppose the first light bulb moment for LUÜNA came. And I just remember thinking to myself then, and also on the flight, why was I so mortified that fellow human beings had seen my tampons and, therefore kind of assumed that I would menstruate? Like, why was that so problematic for me? And also, why in a city like Hong Kong is access to products like these so limited? And to be honest, at the time, I really didn't know the percentage of menstruating people in Asia that were using tampons compared to the UK where I was from. All I knew is that I really didn't feel it was right that basic menstrual health products were hard to come by. And it was those two thoughts, one linked to the stigma that I was faced with, that I was carrying about my own body for the first time, and then the lack of access to these products. It was those two thoughts that basically sparked my initial discussions. Had no intention of starting a company whatsoever, but basically just started. Absolutely not. I mean, no, I was in my early 20s. I didn't have a penny to my name. Starting a company was not on the agenda, but I just started speaking to people, initially other women, colleagues and friends, and then broadened those conversations. I got a job in Shanghai in 2016 where I started advertising on WeChat for strangers to come and talk to me about periods after work or on the weekends, and very quickly was able to see two things. Firstly, just how many of us like me felt in the dark about their bodies, frustrated by not having the right access to products, not having the right access to information, and just feeling very alone. And secondly, as these conversations evolved, seeing the power, as I said earlier, of these communities in being able to
Mm.
equip people with information, or if not, information, at least support and a safe space to discuss their problems and concerns.
So, I had like so many like questions in my head, so I don't even know where where to start. But since you talked about the community Q and A's that you were organizing, I'll start with that. So you started that in Shanghai, right? When you moved to Shanghai for work. So were you conducting this in English primarily, or did you also do it in Chinese? And I'm just curious, like during those times you were doing this, how casual was it? Was it more kind of like a support group where it's just like, hey, like, coffee and tea and biscuits, like let's all, huddle up and talk about our periods and our, discomforts and what we can do to change this situation or provide support for each other? Or was it more like you know because of your own journey and experience, you were very curious to kind of bring about more of an educational format to your gatherings?
It very much evolved over time. If I look back to those very first sessions, so the first question I should answer is what language did we conduct these sessions in? So I was running them with a friend, and they were in English and Chinese, but predominantly Chinese because we were in Shanghai. That's that was the audience that we were the major audience that we were speaking to, was Chinese speaking people. And they were just very casual to begin with. As I said, some dodgy flyer that I probably mocked up myself, posted on WeChat, genuinely offering people to come and talk about periods in exchange for free tea and coffee. I would spend my weekends actually at the time kind of scootering between different cafes, asking who could do me the best deal on tea and coffee if I brought a group of people in for a kind of a meeting. So it was, yeah, it was very casual, I would say. It wasn't, there was no format to the
Yeah.
to the research. I didn't even know it was research at the time.
Yeah,
It
yeah.
was
I was gonna
just
say it was a spontaneous gathering that led you to that was your feedback group.
it was my, yeah, absolutely. So obviously you can tell by the time I decided that this should become a business, there was a lot of evidence and a lot of concept testing that I had, which at the time I didn't know was going to ever be useful for anything other than just having conversations with people. It
Mm.
really was just so organic. And but I very, very quickly became totally, I always say the word obsessed. I think obsessed has negative
Well,
connotations, but
listen, if you were
I can't,
passionate. You were very passionate
passionate is
about
probably
this
better.
topic.
Yeah, passionate is probably better, but I started to be known as that period girl in Shanghai. People would refer to me that way, because, and again, this was before I even wanted to start a brand. It was you can't help but become so passionate about this topic when you spend your evenings and weekends talking to people about what they've been through and seeing not only your own experience mirrored in their stories, but seeing how detrimental these experiences were well into our adulthood. I think it's really amazing that we didn't just sit around specifically talking about periods. Periods were a gateway into so many other important conversations, how we feel about our bodies more broadly, our sexual well-being, our interpersonal relationships. People shared really incredibly sensitive information about their lives, and allowed
Mm,
themselves to be incredibly vulnerable, which honestly, a lot of people, when they heard that I was doing this, just said wouldn't be able to happen. They did not believe that groups of strangers could come together and share in this way. And I remember one story that really sticks with me as a woman who basically, she was in her 30s, and she described to us having had an accident when she was younger, and it had left her vulva deformed. And
mm,
she basically described what that looked like to us. And we were able to say as a group, that's not your vulva being deformed. That's just your labia not being the same. And that is
mm.
incredibly common. Very few people have perfectly symmetrical labia. So I think that example is incredibly profound, because this is, again, a woman in her 30s who has had this belief about her body through lack of education and lack of awareness that has affected so many areas of her life. So yeah, I guess going
Powerful.
back to your original question, yeah, it just evolved, from being very, very casual and very organic in the early days to then, of course, I suppose a few months in, I started to basically take a stronger look at the role that the traditional period care industry had played in
Mhm.
kind of in allowing this status quo to be maintained.
Yeah.
And it was then through that research that I realized that I wanted to start a business, because I felt the only way to combat the effect of that industry and best support our community with both education and physical products was, of course, to be able to start a challenger brand.
Mm. So I'm just curious because you were doing this in Shanghai, and you said primarily conducting it in Chinese. Having
Mm,
been raised in the UK, what were some of the differences you saw, right? Like in terms of like culturally, right? Like the
mm.
cultural aspect of um, these different demographics talking about menstrual cycles.
I have to say, very few, because if you think about the kind of people that were responding to random WeChat flyers to
Uh huh.
come and speak about this topic, I think you can understand that they would naturally be probably a little bit more open. Um, more willing to share their experiences. And I think there are, of course, nuances between different cultures when it comes to this topic, some of them and some very large differences as well. But I think one misconception that I commonly come across is people who say to me, wow, Asia is so much more, there are so many more stigmas around this topic in Asia
Right.
than the West.
Mhm,
And
mhm.
I actually really disagree with that point of view. I think obviously there are different beliefs that stem from different cultural experiences, but the stigma in my mind is equally prevalent in
Mm,
these two parts of the world. They just manifest in different ways.
okay.
So I I think one major difference is the adoption of different products, which we've already touched upon. So tampons today in many parts of Asia are still only used by between like 1% and 3% of the population, which is different to somewhere like the UK, where it can be as high as 70 to 80%,
Right.
which is obviously a really big difference. But then I look at the fact that in the UK, for decades, we have been inserting these products into our bodies without knowing what they are made of. And to
Mhm.
me, that is an incredibly toxic manifestation of the stigma that exists around
Yeah.
menstruation in the UK.
Mm. I like that you tried to debunk that, because I think definitely I would have thought that too, like the whole Asian and Caucasians and, West and East
Mm.
mindset on this. So I think that's very insightful that, as an expert you are in this field, that you'd think, it's equal. There's no difference. Um, I do want to ask too, when you did decide to start Luna, what were some of the initial challenges that you faced? That was like quite, that was like hard for you, and you're kind of like, "Well, do I really want to do this? Like, I'm going in, like, there's no looking back." And how did you keep yourself going and pushing forward? And I think, obviously, from hearing what you said earlier, it's very clear you had that very strong support group that you built, who came through to your events and gave you feedback. So like your little soldiers behind you going like, yes, we need this, this is great what you're doing. But really, to get the whole thing started, right, why is it called Luna? What
Mm.
you saw in the marketplace, were there other competitors? I mean, obviously in the West there are definitely lots of products, like you said, in the marketplace,
Mm.
right? And in the last few years, menstrual cups have been a
Yeah.
huge thing, moon cups and stuff. So, and on top of that, beside product line, I think the educational part, which is so vital into how you basically started too. If you could kind of share with us a little bit about that.
Looking back at the time between building a community, deciding to pursue starting a business, and actually launching the company, and even today, it feels like an incredible blur. And the first thing I would say is, had I known back then when I decided to pursue starting a business, had I known how challenging it would be, I might not have gone in with all guns blazing as I did. I mean, I had no idea what it would entail, to be honest. And you can tell that I am passionate about this and that I was incredibly passionate back then. And I think it's that and the desire and the desire to serve that community that kept me going in what were some incredibly dark days early on, I have to admit. But no, I was incredibly naive about what it would entail. There I was by this time in my sort of mid 20s in Shanghai. I knew straight off the bat that I had to raise money to be able to launch this company. I had no savings of my own. I was on a very, very low salary at the agency I was working on in Shanghai. I didn't have any financial resources to get this off the ground. And I started reaching out to people um, to basically get my idea in front of them, and very quickly got rejected. And
Mm,
I think it was a combination of the idea being quite difficult for a lot of people to grasp. It was also the fact that I didn't have the right materials. I'd never even made an investment deck before. So I talk about this a lot on in interviews where focused around what is needed to start a brand or a
yeah.
business to other entrepreneurs. And the first thing that I kind of touch upon is how I kind of paused in a few months in and thought, this just isn't working. Passion alone is not going to get me like further in this journey. And I turned my attention to basically finding somebody who could help me, who had done all this before. And that was the best decision I ever made. All I did was start I really don't know what I typed in to this day. I don't know what I typed in because I really didn't know what I was looking for. Probably like finance investment into LinkedIn, and basically met with a few women in Shanghai over coffee, one of whom I loved, who's on my board of directors to this day. And she's somebody that had worked for some very large startups in China previously. And she basically loved what I was doing and had decided to help me put together the materials that would eventually allow me to raise that early capital. So without
Mm.
her, and another common theme, and it's not just women, but along my story, you will see that my being able to be here and talk to you today is down to, in many cases, the support of incredible characters like her.
Yeah, it's true. You can be passionate, but if you can't just all do it alone. You have to find the right people and teams, etc., to
Yeah.
get you there, right? Um,
Yeah.
wow. It's funny. I feel like we're kind of like pausing and kind of going back in time, right? Kind of making you reflect a little bit like, huh,
Yeah.
wow, that was like 2017 and now we're in 22 and how many things
Right.
have happened.
And how many things have happened? And something you mentioned earlier that I wanted to touch on is even in 2017, 2018, the global landscape in this industry was still very limited. We are part of a growing, I guess, a growing femtech um, collective globally. There's so much more movement in this space, specifically within the period care industry. There are a number of challenger brands that have popped up across the world, but back then there weren't. And
Yeah.
so, having these conversations, there was actually very few examples that I could point to highlight, the possibilities in this space, and that proved very difficult as well. So it really was just the faith of a few creative and I guess more impact driven investors in those early days who kind of saw the vision that I saw. It was thanks to finding them that we were able to bring this to market. But it was not the crowded more crowded space that it is today back in 2017, which was good and bad. Obviously,
Yeah.
it meant there was fewer competition than there is today, but it also meant, as I said, that it was difficult to highlight examples that had been able to kind of crack this very taboo industry and taboo space.
Why okay, I might be asking like kind of like a naive question here, but what
Mm,
what are the taboos of the industry and why
mm,
has it been dominated by, like when we think of products, for instance, right? It's always
mhm,
been dominated by some the bigger brands, right? And like you said earlier in femtech, there is a growing wave of founders like yourself who are
mm,
entering this sector. And what do you think the overall kind of like mission everyone is trying to push for here? Is it for like, environmental causes, right? Or, for better material, uh, and for cleaner flow, like I feel like there's different categories of how people are trying to enter the sector. And I guess for you with LUÜNA, what do you guys hope to put forth, right? So is LUÜNA only available in Shanghai, like in China and Hong Kong at the moment? Or like can I order it and have it mailed to me in Taiwan?
Yeah, so I've got some really exciting news that I didn't tell you before we started, actually. So we've just got our first clients. So we work with a lot of corporates globally to basically give them period care solutions for their teams. So we've just had two clients in Taiwan sign up, and we will still soon have distribution to Taiwan. So you will be able to
Okay,
get our products.
awesome.
Hopefully, well, definitely online, and then hopefully retail will soon follow alongside those B2B partnerships that we've got. So no, it's not just Hong Kong, it's not just Shanghai. We're available in Singapore, and we are expanding globally in the next few months in some key markets as well. I guess we've really wanted to build a strong foundation in our existing markets before we did that expansion. And of course, COVID didn't help with that global expansion for the last couple of years. But we really do have a mission to make our products and our education available to all people. So that means, regardless of location, regardless of I guess financial ability as well.
Yeah,
So our impact model allows us to be able to serve those who wouldn't necessarily be able to afford our products to be able to access them too. And I mentioned to you before we started, but we have been building for the last 6 months a new digital platform that will launch
right.
this year that will be able to distribute not only products but also education to communities initially across Asia, and then looking to build that out more globally as well.
Awesome. Out of curiosity, how did you find your factories to produce your products?
That's a
Like, how does
great question.
that?
Great question. And my
I'm
answer
assuming
will
that's like
again,
I'm assuming that was also like a challenge at the time, right? Like it's like I'm making these products and I want it to be eco-friendly. How do I find a factory to do that and do all the, CSR and the QC and everything?
yeah. And again, my answer starts with finding somebody who knows what they're doing. So I initially found that person who was able to navigate what is a very, a very complex landscape to be in. When you look at the landscape of period care production, there are not a huge amount globally, but how do you go about finding those who not only have the ability to create trusted products that you can rely upon, but also as a startup are able to accommodate your needs often being smaller order quantities, and in our case, also the integration of different materials that perhaps weren't popular at the time. Because I think conversations around sustainability were very limited in this space back then. And certainly there weren't many companies who were focusing on moving away from, those synthetic, conventional period care products from a health perspective as well. So we needed to find partners who were reliable, incredibly high quality, but also more innovative and willing, therefore, to work with companies who are just starting out like ourselves. So, with the right team members by my side, we set about visiting um, these factories, a number of them, looking at different materials, figuring out which direction we wanted to go in from that perspective. And to be honest, our products since launching have actually evolved quite considerably. We still have to this day the same certified organic cotton material that is the primary material in our range of pads and tampons, which is really important to me because that's the material that I found alleviated my yeast infections that I used to suffer from. So that's actually a really big, I just saw your face react to that point, and it's probably a point I should have mentioned earlier, but it was, a big a big driver for me, was in starting the business, was the fact that I realized that my pads and my tampons had actually been causing the yeast infections that I had suffered with for almost a decade.
Mm.
And that organic cotton was able to alleviate those completely. So organic cotton was always a real staple within our product range. But actually, as we've moved forwards, and again, with the support of factories and partners who are willing to be more visionary and more innovative, we've been able to, as we go, update the materials of, say, like the wrappers, for example, to be more eco-friendly as we move forward. And I guess this also links back to something you mentioned earlier about what do we value at LUÜNA? Is it health? Is it sustainability? And for us, because of the nature of our products, it has always been and will always be health and comfort and well-being first. We exist to be able to provide products that allow us as menstruating people to be able to have comfortable experiences throughout the month. That said, we also deeply believe that it is the role of any brand or company today to continuously innovate to reduce the environmental impact of their work as much as possible. So,
Mm.
whilst that is not our key message that we communicate to our customers and our community, they know, we hope, that they can rely on us to be making those decisions behind the scenes, which aren't always really easy decisions. I've definitely had to make decisions in my journey so far that have definitely cost us business growth in the short term because we have prioritized that long-term sustainability vision. But that is obviously important to us due to the nature of our company and the role that we see ourselves playing in the lives of our customers.
Wow. Okay. So like I'm just like absorbing all this information. It's not every day. Well, for you it's every day, but it's not every day I go around talking to people about menstrual cycles and tampons and
Yeah,
pads
well,
and the
I
kind of
hope
material
I
that
hope
goes
I'm
in there.
coherent. I feel like I haven't spoken to anybody for a few days other than my parents, so I hope that I'm like coherently communicating this.
Oh, well, I'm sure this is a refresher for you. It's kind of nice having to take a break from the conversation.
Yeah.
um, okay, well, so I wanted to ask, I just lost my train of thought, but in terms of for your own personal experience, since we're
Mm,
you know we're talking about personal experiences, uh, with like when you said from your teens to your early 20s and then until you doing LUÜNA, um, in terms of like your relationship with like men, in terms of dating and then like having to talk about this, right? So anything from going like, if you were dating someone at the time and kind of having experience like, yeah, well, once a month, I'm kind of like bleeding a lot, right? Like more so than
yeah.
regular women, like that topic, or just, like you said earlier, maybe like yeast infection happens a lot, having to deal with the other person in that
Mm,
conversation, or even when you decided to start LUÜNA, and you're out and about socializing and you're talking to males, so not females, but
mm,
in conversations, like, what do you do? You're like, oh yeah, I'm the period girl. Like that's what I do. I'm advocating for women's health in this respect. I'm just curious, like, what reactions do
mm.
you normally get? How did you go about it?
Well, I'll say two things. Firstly, the reaction that I used to get and still to this day get when I say the word period in some situations, I secretly thrive off it. I deeply, deeply believe, and I say this a lot in our workshops with corporates or organizations, I really believe that you don't have to start a period care company to be able to do your part in
Mm,
tackling menstrual stigma and promoting gender equality, even by talking about periods at a normal volume, even though, as I have done many times, you will get some weird looks and some judgmental looks, I promise you, in any situation, you are also sparking important and positive
Yeah.
dialogues in the minds of people,
Yeah.
even if they might not say it. So I love talking about periods. I would say that women react as awkwardly as men do in a lot of cases. It is not correct to assume that it is just men who get uncomfortable about this topic. And the second point that I was going to make is men have been some of our strongest allies in our work. I would say
Mm.
to this day, some of the decision makers in companies that have implemented our products and education in their in
Uh-huh.
their places of work have been men, because they have been so appalled when they hear what it is that we go through as women. They are so appalled that, from our research, over 90% of menstruating people in Hong Kong have had to make a toilet roll pad at work because they don't have access to products. This is something that I think a lot of menstruating people have come to accept as the status quo, like I did when I was muling tampons, for a number of years when I first moved to Hong Kong. We don't see objectively how outdated this way of behaving is,
Yeah.
and how at odds with the mission that a lot of us have in terms of promoting gender equality. So I think men can be absolutely some of our strongest allies in this.
Oh, that's so great. I love all the positivity in your very passionate work you're doing.
Yeah,
Great, great
it's
advocate.
it's so important that we include everyone, and that's why
Yeah.
our workshops are always, unless specifically requested by our clients, they are always gender inclusive, and we go to
Mm.
great lengths at promoting them in a way that will attract men as well as people with
Yeah.
periods. And I think that it doesn't always work. Sometimes you just see the word menstrual health, periods, and people naturally don't feel like it's something that is applicable to them if they don't
Yeah. Yeah.
menstruate. But slowly but surely, we're starting to see more and more men attend our sessions, and every time they do, they really speak to the fact that educating people of all genders is really so crucial.
Yeah. Oh, I love it. Okay, so we're coming short on time, and I usually ask my guests, and this is with all episodes. First is what are your words of wisdom, or another way, it's kind of like, if you knew what you knew now, what would you tell your younger self, right? Or for anyone who's listening, who can relate to your menstrual cycle storyline, or even like you said earlier, because you normally do a lot of entrepreneurial talks.
Mm.
So for startups, what would you say? So that's one. And then I always ask the guests to share any resources that really help them along the way. So whether it's like books, or it could be a podcast, it could be another inspiring individual that you look up to, that if you could share with us those as well.
Sure. Jen, so sorry, what was the first one? It was like, what would I tell my younger self, right?
Yeah, it was like, what would you tell your younger self, or tell others who are listening who can relate to your storyline, right? Whether they're someone who's dealing with like irregular menstrual cycles, or if it's someone who is a startup founder, right,
Mm.
etc.
Mm. I would say to my younger self, as well as anybody who is listening, no matter what age they are, please treat your body with kindness. I say that in relation to the struggles that I had in my younger years with menstruation, that I just absolutely really hated and blamed my body for, without realizing that, through being kinder to it, learning more about it, respecting its natural processes more, that I would be able to manage or even overcome those challenging symptoms. And secondly, just in relation to all the body image pressures that people are subject to today, our bodies, we should respect them, regardless of what they look like. And I think that's a really important message that I want to convey.
Mm, that is very important. it's also kind of going back to being intuitive, right? Because I think a lot of that is being very intuitive and not letting outside construct kind of cloud your mindset on that.
Yeah, and it still happens to this day. I'm definitely not free of it. I think, I think we're hard pressed to find anybody that's able to really separate themselves from those pressures. But it's really critical, I think, in
Mm,
being happy in your everyday life and yourself, that we try and move past that. So, and then I think in terms of resources, I just have to say to anybody that's thinking of starting a business, this isn't a recommendation for a book or a podcast. It really is so critical to surround yourself with the right team, or if you can't afford to hire a team, with the right advisors who genuinely understand your vision and can be that sounding board for you when you're starting
mm,
off, because you cannot afford to exist in an echo chamber. An idea that you have that you think is great might not be feasible when it comes to starting a business. It might need some tweaking or evolving, and you need additional brains to be able to do that. So, work really hard once you've got your idea to be clear on your own vision, but also to surround yourself with people that you trust to move it to the next level.
mm. Okay. Great advice. Not really a resource, but advice.
Oh,
Then I
sorry.
was gonna no, no, but that's
Resources.
okay. Yeah, yeah. No, no, but no, it's fine because then I was gonna ask you this. I'm just gonna say, so you're so busy, right? Because you're basically this is your baby, your company. You're probably, booked out in tons of meetings, and these days in the digital world, you're basically connected 24/7. What do you do for your own self-care me time?
I would have probably had a really bad answer to that even
There is
3
no
months ago.
there is no bad
But
answer.
I think honestly the last few years would be really good examples of me perhaps not prioritizing self-care, and perhaps not having that balance really down. But today I definitely make time to put my phone away, to close my laptop. I've been able to start reading again, which was always such a huge part of my life. And I feel like every time I open a book and I turn my phone over, sort of ceremoniously turn my phone over for an hour or so, that's the biggest act of self care that I can think of at this stage.
That's great. Very proud of you.
Thank you. Thank you. I know. I used to
Baby
feel very
baby steps.
guilty. Yeah. For not being having a good answer to that. I like to be very honest, but I know that work has been very all consuming for the last couple of years. But I think at this stage, thanks a lot actually to the team I've got around me now, I'm really able to explore that sometimes elusive notion of balance a little bit further.
Baby steps, baby steps.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I will include all your information in the episode resource below, so
Okay.
people can click to visit your website, follow Instagram, etc. And was there anything else that you would like to add? Oh, and we will get a Curito code for our listeners and readers.
Nice.
So
Okay,
right, so
cool.
people can shop online and get a little fun discount along with that.
Okay,
And
awesome.
yeah. Okay. Well, so thank you so much for your time, Olivia.
Thank you so much.
That's all we have time for today. Thank you for listening to Curito Connects. For more Connects content, collaborations, and discoveries set to inspire you on your own individual journey, please head to our website at www.curito.co. Until next time, stay inspired and thank you for joining us at Curito Connects.